You don't usually notice the habit that keeps you stuck because it doesn't feel like a problem at all. It feels responsible, thoughtful, even mature. Someone asks a question or challenges a choice, and almost automatically you start explaining, adding context, clarifying your intentions, searching for the right words so you won't be misunderstood. In the moment, it seems harmless, just a normal conversation, a small effort to be clear. But something subtle begins to happen in that space. The more you explain, the more you start second-guessing, adjusting, trying to make your reasoning acceptable. And without realizing it, the center of confidence quietly shifts away from you. That's the part most people never see, the silent moment when the need to be understood turns into a pattern that slowly keeps you stuck. There is a simple line that can stop most of these exchanges almost immediately, not because it's sharp or confrontational, but because it quietly removes the ground the other person is standing on. To understand why it works, you have to notice how these situations usually begin. Rarely with anything obvious, more often with a small remark that plants doubt, a tone that hints you're overreacting, or a pause that hangs in the air just long enough to make you rush in and fill it. The pace is deliberate. Nothing feels urgent, and that's the point. Because the real leverage comes from your impulse to clarify, to justify, to make sure you're being seen fairly. The moment you begin explaining, the dynamic changes. Explanations open doors, and every detail you offer becomes something that can be redirected, questioned, or reframed. It feels responsible to defend yourself, even mature, but in practice, it turns the conversation into a negotiation, and boundaries were never meant to be negotiated in the first place. Watch closely how the focus shifts when this pattern takes hold. What actually happened begins to fade into the background, and attention turns instead to how you responded. If you felt hurt, you're told you're too sensitive. If you felt unsettled, you're labeled insecure. If you object, suddenly your reaction becomes the real issue under discussion. Almost without noticing, you're no longer talking about the original behavior. You're defending your emotions, explaining why your response was reasonable, trying to prove that what you felt made sense. That's where most people lose their footing because the conversation is no longer about truth or understanding. It's about control of the frame. Whether your feelings are valid isn't the point to someone who is steering the interaction. What matters to them is keeping you engaged, keeping you talking, keeping you in the position of having to justify yourself while they quietly define the terms of the exchange. So what breaks that pattern? What interrupts the cycle before it gathers momentum? It isn't a clever argument or a sharper comeback. It's something much simpler, a calm statement delivered without edge or apology. I'm not going to explain myself. Then nothing more. No follow-up, no defense, no attempt to soften the words. Just silence. The reason this works is almost mechanical. The entire strategy depends on access to your reasoning, your emotions, your effort to justify and reassure. When that access disappears, the exchange has nothing left to feed on. There is no debate to prolong, no angle to reinterpret, no material to reshape. What they expected was engagement. What they meet instead is stillness, and that stillness changes the balance immediately. Pay attention to what often happens right after that boundary is set. The pressure doesn't always stop immediately. Sometimes it intensifies. You may be told you're being difficult, distant, unfair, or that you're shutting down the conversation. It can sound like concern, but the energy underneath it feels different, sharper, more insistent. That reaction isn't really about communication. It's about the sudden loss of influence. Someone who is approaching you in good faith may pause, may reflect, may even accept the limit without resistance. But a person who depends on steering the interaction will often push harder, trying new angles, shifting tone, reaching for guilt, frustration, or even anger, anything that might pull you back into explaining again. The response in that moment is simple, though not always easy. Repeat the boundary, calmly in the same words, and then step back into silence. Repetition signals certainty, and certainty makes it very difficult for pressure to find a place to land. If the pressure continues, you may notice the tactics begin to change. The tone might soften into disappointment, or shift into woundedness, or harden into irritation, each turn designed to stir a reaction, to draw you back into the exchange on emotional terms. These sudden shifts aren't random. They're attempts to find the one response that makes you re-engage, to reopen the conversation on ground where explanations and defenses can begin again. Your role in that moment is not to counter every new angle, not to argue, not to prove anything. It is simply to hold the line and allow the quiet to remain. Silence, when it follows a clear boundary, creates a kind of pressure that words cannot. People who genuinely want understanding will slow down in that space, will consider what was said. Those who are relying on control often become restless, unsettled, sometimes even agitated, because the exchange is no longer moving in the direction they expected. There is also a deeper shift taking place beneath the surface. When you stop explaining every decision, every reaction, every feeling, you begin to signal something powerful, not to the other person, but to yourself. You show that you trust your own judgment enough not to put it on trial each time someone questions it. Manipulation struggles to survive in the presence of that kind of self-trust, because its leverage depends on uncertainty, on the hope that you will doubt yourself long enough to hand over the authority to define what is reasonable, what is fair, what is true. The moment you stop trying to prove your worth, the negotiation quietly ends. You are no longer asking to be validated, no longer measuring yourself against someone else's shifting standards. And that change is not about winning an argument or defeating another person. It is about stepping out of a dynamic that only functions when you participate in it. It's important to understand what this kind of boundary can and cannot do. It won't transform a difficult person, and it won't repair a relationship built on control. What it does is reveal what was already there. Some people will accept the limit and move on, and in that moment you realize there was no manipulation to begin with, only a conversation that needed clarity. Others will react with sharpness or hostility, and that reaction tells you more than any explanation ever could, because the mask slips when control is no longer available. Seen this way, the sentence isn't a weapon, and it isn't an attack. It's a filter. It separates those who respect limits from those who depend on crossing them. And once that distinction becomes clear, you gain something far more valuable than the upper hand in a conversation. You gain clarity, and clarity gives you the freedom to decide how much access someone truly deserves to your time, your attention, and your inner world. Many people hesitate to speak this way because they worry it will sound harsh or cold. But calm boundaries are neither of those things. They carry no hostility, no sarcasm, no raised voice. The strength comes from steadiness, from saying what you mean without emotional charge, and then allowing the words to stand on their own. Emotion is often what pulls conversations off course, what gives others something to push against or redirect. And when that energy isn't there, the exchange loses its momentum. There is a quiet confidence in saying less, in resisting the urge to fill every silence, to justify every choice, to make sure everyone is comfortable at your expense. You are not required to offer unlimited explanations, and you are not obligated to perform emotional labor for people who repeatedly misuse it. Sometimes the most powerful statement is the simplest one, spoken once, calmly, and then left to settle in the silence that follows. In the end, the real power of a boundary like this is not in the words themselves, but in what they represent. You are choosing not to be pulled into a contest you never agreed to enter, not to hand over your peace in exchange for someone else's approval, not to keep negotiating the value of your own perspective. That choice changes the atmosphere immediately, because the dynamic they relied on no longer exists. Say the line once, calmly, and let the quiet that follows do its work. Watch what unfolds without rushing to repair the silence or soften the moment. Reactions will tell you everything you need to know, far more than explanations ever could. And in that clarity, you begin to see how quickly the balance shifts when you stop trying to justify your place and simply stand in it.